Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Giron. I'm one of the supervisors. Welcome to our session on how to assess whether your child's IEP is working, and then what do you do if it's not? There we go. I want to frame our session with this quote from the National Institutes of Health. And as you read it, what I just want to say is thank you for attending this workshop. We are so glad you're here. Basically, all the research shows that a strong partnership between families and schools leads to better outcomes for students. So we're going to talk about what that looks like and how you can be an empowered advocate for your child. The last slide in this presentation, when we get to it, has several resources that we have found to be useful for families. And there are also resources that we typically pull content from when we're developing workshops like this so that we are consistent across resources. This resource on the slide, I'm going to talk about a few key practices for collaboration between families and schools to help get us started. So this resource outlines 5 key practices. And where we're really going to focus tonight is these last 2, enhancing relationships between home and school to support students. And then if your student is not being successful, basically this resource really hones in on that ask for help. But we're going to go deeper than that because sometimes we need to do more than just asking for help. So let's start with practice 4, enhancing relationships between home and school to support our children. Really, when we think of families, I'm a parent. I have 2 children who have had 504 plans. I've been on the other side of that table. It can be intimidating, and I work for the system. But as parents, you know your children best, and we really have to honor that. And then, the teachers, they have those expertise in that content area. So when we bring those 2 together, that's when we create better outcomes for children. But on the parent side, here's what I want to really strongly encourage you to do. Be sure you're attending back to school night, those conferences. And then I know we're in March, but thinking ahead when the school year starts, send that email to make that contact with the teacher so that the teachers know the best way to contact you. Really, when I heard your speaker in the main room, what spoke to me when she said take charge, I want you to feel empowered to take charge of making those introductions and advocating for your child. Key practice number 5 really is that starting that process of when if your child is not having success, what to do about it. And we really start by asking for help, finding out what's going on. A few things I want to make sure that you know. If you have an elementary school child, your child has a classroom teacher. Sometimes they might have 2, depending if the school switches classes for math and literacy. But your child in elementary school also has a special education case manager. And that is the person who's responsible for all those tasks around case management, setting up those meetings, right? Developing that IEP. When you're communicating, it's important that you're communicating with both that special education case manager and that classroom teacher so that we're all on the same page. If you are lucky enough to have a middle school or a high school student, or if you have a student who will be approaching middle school next year, just a reminder, your student will have 7 teachers. One of those teachers may or may not be the special education case manager. So when you have questions or concerns around special education, it's very important to be in contact with that case manager. As a parent of high schoolers, I will tell you, be sure that you are familiar with Parent View and how to use it. It's really easy to send emails and click on the staff, the teacher that you need to direct it to. And sometimes it needs to go to all teachers, but that special education case manager is that person who is responsible for ensuring that that IEP is implemented and for partnering with you when you have questions around the IEP. And Devana?
Yep. So when we're talking about the special education process, the IEP itself should be clearly defined and understood. So if you as a parent are sitting on the other side of that meeting table and you really don't understand what's on your child's IEP, it's okay to ask the team to pause so you can ask your questions. It's also okay for you to come back to the team and say, hey, I still have questions about this, or I thought about this in something that was said in the meeting that I don't understand. It's important that you understand this document for your child. The IEP itself is updated annually, so every year at the annual review. Reevaluations happen every 3 years typically. So that is when we do the full battery of assessments or whatever is warranted for your child. Documents are to be sent home 5 days before the IEP meeting. That is 5 business days before the IEP meeting. You want to read those in advance, read all the documentations, go through the IEP, so that way you can come with some questions already locked and loaded, ready to go, as well as suggestions. You can also request an IEP meeting at any point in time. You don't have to wait to an annual review to meet with the team. Personally, I'm a parent of a child who has an IEP. I like to meet with the team at the beginning of the school year just to make sure that the new team that has my child in their classes has an understanding of what's on my child's IEP and what her needs are. And also, progress on goals and objectives are reported out quarterly. So whenever we are getting our report card, and Kelly, if you want to go to the next slide, because that's the top bullet. Whenever you receive that report card around that same time, you should be receiving your child's quarterly progress report. There should be a data analysis about your student's progress. And if your child is marked as not making progress, the IEP team must convene. We must have a discussion around why your child's not making progress and what changes we might want to propose to the IEP. So that could include updating present levels, adding additional instructional strategies, or revising their goals or objectives. So we have to fill in that gap and figure out why exactly your child is not making progress. If you do not receive your progress notes, you need to contact the school, talk to the case manager, and get those progress notes. And understanding the data. So in the present levels of academic functional performance, that's updated at all IEP meetings. So even if you as a parent request an IEP meeting, there needs to be some updated data that's inputted into that IEP so you have something to actually discuss. And you would look at your current and previous IEP cycle within the last year, use multiple sources of data for each area of impact, and look at trend data for previous years that the student had an IEP. You should be able to understand the data. And if you don't understand the data, feel free to ask those questions again. We love to use acronyms in MCPS, like MCPS. Um, so you wanna make sure that if you're sitting at the table and people are throwing around all of these acronyms and you're like, what's a BIP? What's a FBA? What's a SDT, who's this person and who's that person? Ask those questions so you have a really good understanding of who we're talking about and what we're talking about when we're discussing your child. And look at the data. If the data is not showing progress, we need to have a conversation about that. Do you have enough data in and of itself to identify some patterns and ask yourself if anything is missing? So it really comes down to advocating and knowing what to ask. And I'll turn it over to Ashley.
Great, thank you. So before your IEP meeting, reviewing the information that's sent home as part of your 5-day documents, but even before that, responding to the meeting invitation, whether or not you're available and the date will work for you. Once you've received the IEP documents that are going to be reviewed at your meeting, which should come 5 days prior to your scheduled meeting, take the time and review them. Create or update your vision of your child. So what are your goals? What is your input? What do you as a family want for your child? And what do you need the school team to know are the priorities so that you're able to make sure that collaborative effort is heard and incorporated into the IEP. Take the time to think about and write down the questions or concerns that you want to have shared at the meeting. And if you don't have the chance to do that ahead of time, in the moment is fine. You can always reach out before the meeting, certainly during the meeting, or after the meeting with additional questions that you may think of. When you prepare your parental input, that parent letter that comes to you with your invitation letter, you can send it ahead of time prior to your IEP meeting or provide it at the meeting. That way your input is incorporated ahead of time if received ahead, and then at the meeting certainly can add on any additional input. And if you do need an interpreter, please ask for one. Want to make sure that the time to schedule to have an interpretation services in the language that you need are available and prepared for you for your child's IEP meeting.
Ashley, there are a few questions in the chat going back to progress notes and PLAFs. Do you mind if we address them real quick before moving on?
Not at all.
Okay, because I think we have the time. There's a question about quarterly reports. If they say making progress but don't meet goals within the IEP year. Yeah, that is a great question. When your
I'm sorry,
progress.
excuse me, just a
Oh,
second.
yes.
We have a question and answer period afterward.
Oh, okay.
So if we could just hold on, we do reserve time, and that'll be in about we're a little behind. I'm gonna give it about 8 minutes.
Okay, that sounds perfect. So,
Thank you.
yeah, please go ahead and put your questions in the chat and then we'll address them after we're done.
Thank you. So during the IEP meeting, please consider to have your child participate in the meeting. So starting at whatever age as a family you feel comfortable having your child involved in their IEP meeting, learning about how they can also join in their advocacy for learning their needs. But also some meetings it starts with just saying hello, the student's name, and students have different levels of participation depending on the family choice. But knowing that as your child gets older, at the age of 14, they must be invited to their IEP meetings as part of the transition planning part of the IEP. And then students are more actively involved during their IEP meetings from year to year, especially as they are getting older. Again, during the meeting, wanted to hear from parents and families about your vision and what you want in terms of goals and your input with the school team. And we always know that as parents and families, you're the most important member of the team on behalf of your child. So ask the questions and share your thoughts because the team is here to work on your child's behalf and make sure that we're working together. And after your IEP meeting or after the IEP meeting, again, you want to take the time to review the documents that have been sent to you following your meeting. And if you have any questions or there are any times where you have not received the documents within 5 days, that you contact the IEP chair. At the elementary level, that's going to be the IEP case manager or a special educator that's assigned to your child. At the secondary level, it would also be that special educator or the case manager. At the secondary level, there's also the resource teacher, special education, or the RITC for short, which also can be a point of contact for you and your family. After the meeting, you want to also keep track of how your child is doing with both their schoolwork and or homework, and keeping that line of communication open with concern or questions or wonders around what is included in their school and or homework. And again, those concerns go back to your child's teacher. Like Ms. Duran said earlier, at the elementary level, that would be the classroom teacher and the special educator, the case manager. At the secondary level, there may be the need to talk to one specific classroom teacher and the case manager, or you may need to talk to multiple teachers depending on what the concerns may be. And again, if you would like to request an IEP meeting, you are welcome to ask for a request an IEP meeting at any time. It is best that this request is received in writing, by email, or with a written note. So we also have some resources that are linked here in our presentation. So you will be able to access those when you receive the presentation, that are coming from the Maryland State Department of Education, that are Family Guide to the Special Education Process, the Guide to the Parental Rights and Safeguards, Understanding the IEP, the Special Education Compliance Manual from MCPS, and then also a resource about supporting students with disabilities at school and at home. And these are great resources that are available to all families, and we want to make sure that you have them available to you as well. I'll pass back to you, Kelly.
Tiffany, are you okay if we address some of these questions in the chat?
Absolutely. We can go ahead and get started with those. Let's just take a look. There are a lot of them.
I glanced at them. They're great questions.
They are really great questions. There's a question, what if quarterly reports say making progress but don't meet goals within IEP year? If this is the case, how do they determine making sufficient progress?
Okay, that's a good one. I'll start, and then Ashley, Devonna, anytime you want to jump in, or so when your quarterly progress notes come home for your child, you should have both qualitative and quantitative data in there. Meaning, when I look at the goal, or when you look at the goal, there should be data that tells you how much progress towards that goal. And there should be some information to go with that. Not all of our children meet an entire goal in an IEP cycle all the time. So if the entire goal isn't mastered, my first look would be, well, what does the data say in those progress notes about what has been mastered? And then I want to look at, well, which part of that hasn't been mastered? And typically we take that chunk and incorporate it into a new goal if the entire goal hasn't been mastered. Beyond that, we really want to have a discussion, well, what needs to change in the IEP, in the instruction, so that we can have more progress, so that the entire goal can be mastered. But yeah, that does happen because we are charged with writing pretty ambitious, lofty goals, but also trying to make sure that they are attainable in a year.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that answer. Should PLAF data be updated before requested IEP meeting, and that is present levels of academic achievement and functional performance?
I guess I can take that one also. Yes. So anytime you have an IEP meeting, the present levels should be updated. There's a few exceptions if you're coming back just for a continuation and there's not been time to collect more data, you might not have an update. But yes, every time there's an IEP meeting, present levels are updated, and the information in present levels spans a calendar year. So if I have an IEP meeting in March, all of the data should be present going back to March 2024. Anything prior to March 2024, we remove because that IEP is for 1 year cycle.
I will
All
also
right.
I would just add on that it's also important when you reach out to the school and you're requesting that IEP meeting, make it clear why you're requesting the IEP meeting. That would help the team in knowing what necessarily needs to be updated in that IEP. So we go in with a common understanding of, okay, we have behavioral concerns. We're going to make sure that we have some updated behavior data that we put in the IEP, because that is why the meeting is being requested to begin with. So making sure we have very clear communication between the school team and home so the team knows what the common goal is.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. How long after a meeting should you receive the updated IEP plan? And do we receive a written record of decision on what was discussed prior written notice?
So I'll take that question. And so within 5 business days of your IEP meeting, you should receive the IEP updated, as well as a prior written notice, which should include the decisions that were made at the IEP meeting.
Can I add a caveat to that?
Yes, please.
Sometimes when we have IEP meetings, even if it's an annual review, we may not get done with all of our discussions. And in that case, you may not get a fully revised IEP because we haven't come to a decision as an IEP team. You should still receive a prior written notice. However, you may not get all of your IEP documents back within that 5 days, because as a team, we've agreed we're coming back. And we've also agreed what date we're coming back on. So you would then get it 5 days after that final date, if there is a continuation meeting that's scheduled.
Okay. Are quarterly reports done based on when report cards are sent home or when your IEP started?
We align them to the end of the quarter, so based on report cards. So the end of the marking period, I believe, is the end of this month. So if you have an IEP meeting in the next 2 weeks, say it's in initial IEP, sometimes there's not enough time to address a goal, and that's when it would be marked newly introduced.
Okay. The first speaker mentioned adding home school communication as a supplementary aid. Do you have examples how this is structured?
I do. Um, So I will say not every student needs that. So it is very individualized if a homeschool communication system needs to be added as a supplementary aid. Um, and some examples would be if my child is nonverbal, and so it I, as a parent, want to know what happened in school. I might need a homeschool communication journal so that I can get some type of communication about how his or her day it was. When I was in the classroom, that was your typical notebook. It can be a notebook. Some schools have moved to a Google document that's shared between staff and parents. But the purpose of that is really when there needs to be communication between the teacher, the school staff, and the parent beyond what the student is able to or going to tell you when he or she comes home. I don't know if Ashley or Devonna, you want to add to that?
I think
Okay.
it would be individualized based on the need of the specific student. It could include an example of one for a student who may be non-speaking but needs a regular communication. There could be some sentence starters with some options where it's a co-journal or co-writing between the student and the teacher, with area of back and forth between the family and the school, or just one-way communication. It really depends on the purpose of the communication and what the student and family need.
Okay. I'm going to take a stab at the next one, so I may need a little help. Can you share examples of how to include students with intellectual developmental disabilities on ALO? I don't know what ALO is, in IEP meetings. Any guidance on how to do this would be helpful.
Sure. So for including students with intellectual or developmental disabilities who are on alternate learning outcomes, which is ALO, in IEP meetings, it can look very different depending on the individual student, their age, their communication needs. and where they are and what their family interaction for the student may want to be. But I would say for some of the early meetings, just coming in and introducing themselves, whether that is through their voice output device, supported language. It depends on what that student interaction may be, perhaps sharing something about their own goals or something they like to do. Or it could be much more than that, because each student may share something different or have something they want to say or something that's really important to them and their own experiences that they want to share.
Does ALO mean non-diploma seeking or something else?
It means alternate learning outcomes, which is when we have students who are working on the alternate framework, meaning that they receive a modified curriculum and require alternate instruction and alternate state assessments. Many of our students who do work on alternate learning outcomes, instruction, and assessment may not be able to meet the full criteria, the depth and breadth of the general education curriculum. So yes, many of the students do work towards a certificate of completion who are on ALO.
Thank you. What is to be added to the IEP or updated in the document after the meeting?
That would depend on what was discussed during the meeting. So, for example, if the team had a discussion around phonics for a student, during the meeting, we would discuss what is currently in the present levels, where is the student currently performing. We would take a look at those goals and objectives. And as a parent, if you're saying, I have concern about that the fact that they're only able to read at 50% accuracy, we would add that input into the IEP as well. And we would also take a look once again at those goals and objectives and determine what needed to be changed. So it really depends on what the team decides and what the discussion is around during the actual IEP meeting itself. And it's perfectly okay for you as a parent to ask for a recap before that meeting ends to ensure you understand what you should see on that next draft or copy of the IEP that goes home.
There's a question here that you may or may not have thoughts about, but I am going to ask it. With the upheaval with the Department of Education, how will that affect Montgomery County Public Schools IEP? And I'm thinking they mean the IEP process.
So I can jump in, and good evening, everyone. I'm Kia Murphy. Excuse me. I'm the director for the Department of Special Education Services. And I think I 100% agree with you, Tiffany, when you say that you may not have an answer. The reality is that given the current climate at the federal level, I can't give you any information with certainty. But what I can share is approximately 9% of our funding comes from the feds and Montgomery County Public Schools. So certainly we need to continue to monitor that as that amount may be reduced. So we would have to make provisions because we do want to make sure that our children do have what they need. So that would be the important part to know from this.
There is a comment here, and it is duly noted about breakout sessions based on school age grade. We are certainly going to have a feedback form for you to put those things in to give some grace to our conveners. This is the first time this has happened, so we will definitely need your feedback as to how we can make this better for you. Who would we speak to about back to school night? I found back to school night to be pointless for me. There was no focus on special education, and the curriculum details really had no relevance for Tracy's child. Is there a guide for back to school night that is education focused? That's a great question.
And that's a question I would speak to your school. I would give the feedback to the school's administrator. The school structure back to school nights, there is MCP as guidance, but there is a lot of individualism based on the community's needs.
And did we get information on the administrator? There was a question earlier about that. How do we find out who that is?
I'm sorry, I'm talking about the principal or the assistant
The
principal.
principal
For
or
the
the
school,
assistant
yes,
principal?
yes.
Okay, okay. Then there is another question about DOE. You know, that's something that we can speculate about at this point. I'm sure MCPS will be keeping us aware as much as they can.
Do you mind if
Uh,
I jump in?
Sheena, are you asking a question?
I'm so sorry. I don't mean to jump in. I don't mean to interrupt you. Is in regards to the last question you asked. Just to let you know, as a parent perspective, the back to school night question, I think asked by a different parent. It's really sad for parents of kids with special needs. I've attended all of them for my son. He's in first grade. I attend both the gen ed back to school night and then a break off session to the special ed back to school night. It's pointless. And that's why I understand where that parent's question is coming from. She said her back to school night was pointless. It's literally a classroom presentation. Like, hey, here's a classroom. That's it. Like the back to school night for the gen ed kids was great. Here's the curriculum. This is what we're doing. Back to school night for my child, it was just here's a classroom, here's a teacher, here's the para. That's it. It's pointless. So it's like I can see where the frustration lies for that parent who put that guy. I definitely relate.
I
I just
understand
wanted to
that definitely.
I just want to jump in for a minute. I'm Erica Williams. I'm the director for special education pre-K programs and services. But this is my first year in this position. Previously, I was an elementary school principal last school year. So that's why I put in the chat to definitely like reach out and ask directly to speak to the principal of the school. I mean, if they're maybe not available, maybe ask for the AP, but I would go straight to the principal because principals want that feedback. I think hearing from you as parents would be very meaningful to the principals because I know that the system is charged with finding ways to engage with families more. And so each year, principals and the leadership teams are tasked with trying to make improvements to things like back to school night. So don't feel like you're making a fuss, really like send an email or see if you can, stop by and talk or make a call and make an appointment because they need to keep that in mind because in the summer, really in the spring into the summer, they start planning for back to school night for the next school year. So it would be great for you to provide that feedback to them.
And I
That's a
was going
great
to say that's a great point. That's a great question. And also I want to encourage parents who see their children moving along the spectrum as they get older. That need will change, especially as they're more conscious of about being different. So educators do need to hear that. Educators and administrators do need to understand that there is a difference from a first grader than an 11th grader or a ninth grader. So thank you. Thank you for raising that.
No, and sorry again for not, I don't want to interrupt you again, Erica. That was a great point. But as a parent, my son is a first grader. So I guess I asked the question about the break off sessions for the future to be separated in regards to age groups, because as a parent of an elementary school child, the environment you coming in there, the principal is there. He's there to greet you. I've raised this question before. It's very pleasant, it's very open, it's social. I've raised this before, but nothing changes. So as my son matriculates to second grade, I just would like a change. I guess my error, and you guys made a great point, I should have this in writing, but nothing changes. I've raised this before.
I will say that, Sheena, we do have to press on. There will be a feedback form because that is something that we do not discuss very often. This is the first time this has happened. Thank you for raising that. That is a great point, but I will encourage you to please leave it on the feedback form so that it can be followed up. That is something that we do need to pay more attention to that we just don't at this time. So thank you. Thank you again for that.
No, I
Um,
definitely added that on the form. I'm so sorry. I'm thankful for this email was even sent to me. I didn't even know about this. I got this in my email.
We
I,
are we
I want to
we
thank
are
you guys.
we are running out of time, so thank you. But
But thank you. No,
we gotta
thank you
flesh
so
on.
much.
So
That's it.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. The next question, what is MCPS doing about providing more supports around academics and SE and SEL. We will need that to be explained to students with special needs. I've had to get tutors to help because it just feels like she's not making enough gains. I have an amazing case manager and team, but I feel that the district needs more support.
So a lot of that, and
I'm
I'm gonna
sorry,
sh-
can you tell us what SEL is, please?
Oh, yes, social emotional learning.
Thank you.
So that's a very broad question. So if I were to narrow it down, thinking of the scope of this breakout room, I'm looking at my child's IEP. I have two things I really want to look at. I want to look at how is my child making progress in the grade level curriculum. So looking at what supports are in place to help access that grade level curriculum, but also if my child's behind in a content area, what supports, what interventions are being put in place to help close that gap. And when I say close that gap, I don't mean just he or she is always going to be behind. I mean, how are we going to accelerate closing the gap before where the child is and where the grade level is? So there's that very individualized piece that we work through at the IEP process. MCPS as a whole is, to be as brief and concise as possible, is really focused on providing professional learning for classroom teachers, those general education teachers, to help. How do we provide that specially designed instruction, which is really implementing the IEP for our students receiving services, and also continue to provide that professional learning for our special education teachers. Again, both at that grade level instruction, but also really focused intervention. As far as other supports, there is some new policy coming that has come out from the state of Maryland around literacy, which has really pushed MCPS to be much more deliberate in how we are screening children, not for special education, but screening children for potential reading difficulties, and then communicating to parents where your child is and if your child does need more support. So there's also that communication piece. Tiffany, I'm going to go ahead and put the slides back up so that last evaluation slide can be shown. It's my understanding, I think MCPS is needing to leave at this point.
I also do have a link to a feedback form that is directly in the chat. If anybody wants to go to that, there is one that's in there also. Thank you. There's a QR code here as well. There is a question here about present levels, MAP assessments. Is there an adjustment made for students because there seems to sometimes not be a relationship between the MAP results and competency levels? Is there an answer about that?
Yeah, I can answer that question about the MAP.
Thank you.
The measures of academic progress, there's one for reading, there's also one for mathematics. Those are for the majority of students, whether they're in special education services or not, are done on the computer. So I'll just say that that is the way that that assessment is done, and it adjusts based on your child's answer. So it'll get more complicated or it will get easier trying to determine where your child is currently performing. But I think not so much about whether or not there's a different assessment as much as it's important to have a variety of assessments to understand what skills your child currently has and what skills we need to work on. So there are lots of informal ways to gather information when you talk about just in terms of the daily instruction, as well as the curricular assessments. So it depends on what you're trying to measure. There's not one answer, but there certainly are definitely different kinds of assessments, formal and informal, standardized, and based on the information that we need is perhaps the way that you would determine what assessment you would use.
I am going to ask, is MAP mandatory?
So that is, depending on the grade level, it is definitely a district assessment that we use. So it's a way for us to get a snapshot of where a child is performing. It is administered to all grade levels through 8th grade. Sometimes in high school, they will use it just as an idea to understand what grade level a child might be currently performing on. But from K to 8, or actually K to 2, they're using the DIBELS. And then they administer MAP at grade 3.
So I'm going to ask it a different way. Can a parent opt out of MAP?
I think what I would say to you is that's a conversation to definitely have with your school-based team. Because again, you know, I value the question and understanding what are you trying to learn about your child and their performance. So rather than say to you, yes, opt out, I think have the conversation, determine what it is that you believe your child requires, talk to the team, and make it relevant for you, for your child, for the team.
There is someone here, thank you. There is someone here that would like to unmute to ask their question. I'm going to ask that you keep the question very concise, and yes, you may.
Thank you. I think I have 3 questions. First question would be, how much time do teachers train with students who have, let's just say, ADHD? Because with ADHD, a lot of things look more behavioral than the ADHD impulsiveness. And I'll use an example like fire drills, for an example. That would be my first question. My second question would be, how do you navigate when when report cards come out? Let's say just before report cards come out, in the first 2 weeks, you're making sure that all assignments are in, the grades are where, you know, they're not an E, for an example. You've been communicating by emails with the teacher and including the case manager, and this is the student that is doing that. And then once the report card comes out, the grade that they discussed at one point plunders after the grading period. And I posed this question to bring up the fact the equality of when their assignments have to be on time, and then the teachers' grades are not in at the same time, to give an accurate look of what it's supposed to look like on Synergy or Canvas. I can't remember which one I use more often, but I know that there's a slight difference in the calculations, which also poses a challenge, or let's say depression or disappointment with your child, and frustration, which then has them to tap out. Maybe I'll leave it at those 2 questions because I'm losing the third one.
So are you stating that the student is not getting the appropriate feedback in a time frame to really see where the student is?
Yes, because she has communicated prior and has done all-nighters. And even before these examples, have worked with the team. We collaborated. I posed a suggestion to say that since there's time built in for extra time, would it be possible to get the syllabus, if you will, so that maybe the assignment would land on time, if you will.
Do
And
the
that,
people do
Mhm.
the people here on the call understand the question as it is posed?
I think I understand, but I also think I need more information. And I
Okay,
don't,
I think what is being stated is that the student is not getting the appropriate feedback on their performance in a timely fashion because the teacher is not giving the feedback in a timely fashion, which is resulting in the student not being able to say what they need in a timely fashion. So when they get the grade, when they get the progress report, the grade may be lower than what they expected because the teacher is not giving the feedback in an appropriate amount of time. I think that's what I'm hearing.
That's
yes,
correct.
in my response, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, yes, that's correct, because I have at several times wanted to, I think you put in a request for change of grade and have them look at the reasoning behind the request. So yes, we're going in the right direction for that question.
And I
Or maybe it's more of a statement of saying this is not happening and we cannot catch up. My student has a need that is not being met. And it's
Right,
because the
and
teacher is not giving the appropriate feedback in a timely fashion for a student who has a demonstrated need of a different type of accommodation.
And I'll include across the board, this is the standard with all students. Students, of course, kind of wait till at the last minute, if you will, because they know report cards are coming out. They're putting it, asking the question about their grades. And then at that time told, oh, you have a B now. But then when the report card rolls out, they may have a C or D or even maybe an E. But I'm talking about a significant change in points and grades because the information or the grades have not been tallied in the same way students supposed to turn in their assignments and graded on time. The grades aren't in and graded on time for it to reflect on their report cards.
So
the
I'm
student is not getting an accurate picture of where they really are.
Yes.
Okay.
Tiffany, can I jump in? A few
Mhm.
things. And this is going to be the last question because MCPS does need to log out. This sounds, while there is a larger issue here, it also sounds very nuanced and individualized. When a situation like this happens, I really urge you to, this also, I'm going to guess based on my own parental experience, this is a secondary student. I would urge you, if you're not getting the feedback from the teacher, to reach out to the school's special education department head.